the card while I was asleep. Not the card itself, they took the number, memorized it, or wrote it down somewhere, I still don't know which. What I know is that when I checked my banking app at 6:30 on a Tuesday morning in February, there was a pending charge of $412 at a home renovation store in Mississauga, and I had not been to Mississauga, and I had not bought anything. And the only people who had ever had access to my wallet were the two people who raised me. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. The heat clicked on. The radiator hissed. Outside, someone's car wouldn't start in the cold. And I listened to it grinding over and over. And I thought, there it is. That sound. That's the sound of something that almost works. Let me tell you about my brother first, because you need to understand him before you can understand any of what happened. His name is Theo. He's 31, 2 years older than me, and for as long as I can remember, he has been the sun at my parents' orbit. Not because he's extraordinary, he isn't, and I don't mean that cruelly, I mean it factually. He's charming in that easy, careless way the people who've never had to try tend to be. He laughs loudly. He tells the same 5 stories at every family dinner. He forgets birthdays but shows up with gas station flowers, and somehow that counts. My mother has a framed photo of him on her dresser from when he was 17, playing hockey. There is no framed photo of me anywhere in my parents' house. I checked once. Not out of self-pity, out of sheer morbid curiosity. I went room to room, nothing. I moved back home at 26 after my lease ended and I was saving for a down payment. Stupid decision, in retrospect, that rents in the GTA had gotten genuinely insane, and my parents offered, and I thought, 2 years, maybe 3, then I'm out. I would keep my head down. I would contribute to groceries. I would be fine. Theo was already there. He'd been there, on and off, for most of his adult life. He had a girlfriend, then didn't. He had a job in sales, then didn't. He had a plan to start a landscaping company, then a plan to get into real estate, then a plan to go back to school, and none of these plans ever produced anything except new reasons why he needed more time, more money, more patience from everyone around him. My parents gave him all of it, cheerfully, without question. When I moved in, I paid rent, $400 a month, which I insisted on, which they pretended to resist, and then accepted. Theo paid nothing. When I asked my mother about this once, very carefully, very neutrally, she said, "He's going through a hard time, Abby." Like the hard time had a scheduled end date that I wasn't privy to. My name is Abby. I work in financial compliance at a mid-sized firm downtown. I have an RRSP and a TFSA and a spreadsheet where I track every dollar I spend. Not because I'm anxious, but because I came from a family that taught me, mostly through negative example, that money disappears if you don't watch it. I watched it. I saved. By the time I was 28, I had $62,000 sitting in a high-interest savings account, earmarked for a down payment. I told my parents about it once, offhandedly, not bragging, just mentioning that things were on track, that I'd probably be ready to buy in the spring. My mother hugged me. My father said he was proud of me. 3 months later, the charge appeared on my card. $412. Then, 2 days after I flagged it with my bank and had the card cancelled and a new one issued, my mother sat me down at the kitchen table and told me that Theo needed help. He had gotten into a contract dispute with the supplier for the landscaping company, the one that had never actually launched, and he owed money, and there were late fees, and he was in a really tough spot, and she and my father had already given him what they could, and they were wondering if I could help just bridge the gap. "How much of a gap?" I said. She said $8,000. I looked at her for a moment. The refrigerator hummed. Theo was in the next room. I could hear the television. "I need to think about it," I said. What I thought, sitting in my room that night, was this: the $412 at the home renovation store. I had assumed it was a mistake, a random fraud, the kind of thing that happens. But Theo had a new drill. I had seen it in the garage 2 weeks ago, still in the box, bright yellow, and I had thought nothing of it because I was not, at that point, thinking of my family as people who would steal from me. I opened my banking app. I looked at the date of the charge. I looked at my calendar. I had been at a work conference in Ottawa that week. My wallet had been in my room, in the drawer of my nightstand where I always keep it. My parents had a key to my room. It was their house. I sat with that for a long time. The thing about realizing your family has been stealing from you is that it doesn't feel like a lightning bolt. It feels like watching a photograph develop. Slowly, the shapes become clear. The charge. The drill. The timing. The way my mother hadn't quite met my eyes when she brought it up. How she'd moved past it quickly. How she'd pivoted immediately to Theo's situation, as if the two things were unconnected. They weren't unconnected. I didn't say anything, not that night. Instead, I started paying attention. Over the next 6 weeks, I tracked everything. I installed a small camera in my room, a simple one, the kind people use for home security, about the size of a thumb drive, clipped to the inside of my bookshelf where it looked like a charger. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like I was being paranoid. But I had a suspicion that had taken root, and the only way to kill it, or confirm it, was to know. I also started going through the mail more carefully. My parents were on my car insurance policy as secondary drivers, a holdover from when I first got the car and was on their plan. The renewal had come up, and I had added my own name as primary and quietly removed theirs, but I hadn't gotten around to separating the policies entirely. When the updated documents came, I saw that someone had called the insurance company and added Theo as a driver on my vehicle. No one had asked me. I called the insurance company from my office. I spoke to someone named, I don't remember her name, actually. I remember only that she was very patient with me when my voice went flat, in the way it does when I'm trying not to cry. She confirmed that a change had been made 3 weeks ago by someone identifying themselves as the primary policyholder. The change had been made over the phone. My parents knew my policy number. They'd helped me set it up 4 years ago. I removed Theo from my policy. I noted the date and time and the representative's name in a document I had started keeping on my work laptop, which no one in my house could access. I called it simply the ledger. Into the ledger went everything: the credit card charge, the insurance change, a cash withdrawal of $300 from a joint household account my mother and I shared for groceries, money that had come out the same week Theo mentioned needing to cover a bill, a conversation I'd had with my father in November where he'd asked, very casually, if I had considered putting Theo on the down payment as a co-ball thrower, just so he has something to show for himself, my father had said, and I had said I'd think about it, and I had written it down that evening in my journal. And now I added it to the ledger too. The ledger became very detailed. I am good at details. This is what I do professionally. Find the discrepancies, trace the thread, understand where the money actually went. I had spent 3 years doing this for corporations. Doing it for my own family was not something I had ever imagined, but here I was. My mother asked again about the $8,000 in March. Theo needed it for legal fees now. The story had grown, and time was becoming a factor. I told her I was still thinking about it. What I was actually doing was moving money. Not hiding it, not anything illegal, just restructuring. I opened 2 new accounts at a separate bank, a credit union I had never used before and that my family had no knowledge of. I set up automatic transfers from my primary account. Slowly, quietly, over about 6 weeks, I moved the majority of my down payment savings into the new accounts. I kept enough in my old account to look normal. 2 months of regular deposits, regular small withdrawals, nothing suspicious. I also went to see a lawyer, a real estate and family law firm downtown, not cheap, but I needed to understand what my actual exposure was. I walked in and sat across from a woman who had the particular energy of someone who has heard every version of every story and retained the ability to be genuinely interested anyway. I told her about the insurance change. about the credit card, about the joint account, about my father's suggestion regarding the co-borrower. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "You haven't agreed to anything in writing." "No." "Has any money actually left your account to him?" "The 4 and 12, that I can prove." She told me that was recoverable. She told me that an unauthorized insurance change without my consent was potentially a matter for my insurer's fraud department. She told me that a joint household account was murkier, but that if I had records of the specific withdrawal coinciding with Theo's payment, that was meaningful. She told me, most importantly, to stop sharing any financial information with my family immediately, change passwords, separate accounts. Do not tell them about savings, assets, or plans. I had already done most of this, but hearing it from her made something settle in my chest. I wasn't being crazy. I wasn't being dramatic. I was being methodical, and methodical was the right thing to be. I paid her consultation fee and walked out into the cold and stood on King Street for a moment, watching the streetcar go by. I gave myself until the end of April. The reason for the deadline was practical. I had found an apartment, not a house. The market had shifted, and I'd recalculated, and a 2-bedroom condo in Hamilton was within my revised budget and closer to what I actually wanted anyway. I had made an offer quietly through an agent I'd never mentioned to my parents. The offer had been accepted. Closing was set for the last week of April. My parents did not know this. Theo did not know this. No one in my family knew because I'd spent 4 months learning, in very concrete terms, what happened when I told my family things. The week before closing, my mother came to me again. This time she sat down with the manner of someone who was prepared. She had a number written on a piece of paper. She slid it across the table. $12,000. She said Theo's situation had escalated. She said there were now penalties. She said the family had talked about it, she and my father, and they felt that given everything they had done for me over the past few years, providing housing, being supportive, it wasn't unreasonable to ask me to help Theo in a meaningful way. Given everything they had done for me. I looked at the piece of paper. I thought about the rent I had paid every single month, the groceries I had bought, the $412, the insurance change, the joint account withdrawal, the co-borrower suggestion, the ledger. I said, "I appreciate you telling me. Let me see what I can do." She relaxed. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I did not say anything about the condo. I did not say anything about the accounts. I smiled and I went to my room. And I finished packing my boxes, which I had been doing at night for the past 2 weeks, stacking them neatly in my closet. Closing day was a Thursday. I had arranged to get the keys in the morning. I had arranged for a moving company, a small one, 2 guys and a van, to be at my parents' house at 1 in the afternoon. I told my parents that morning that I had some errands to run. My father was at work. Theo was still asleep. My mother was in the kitchen with her coffee. I said I'd be back by noon. I got my keys. I did a walkthrough of the condo. I stood in the empty living room with the winter light coming in through the big south-facing window, and I thought about the ledger, and the camera on the bookshelf, and the woman at the law firm, and the grocery account, and my brother asleep in the next room at 11 in the morning for the entirety of his adult life. I thought about my mother's hand on mine. "Given everything we've done for you." I felt something go very quiet inside me. The movers arrived at 1 on the dot. They were efficient and cheerful, 2 brothers from Brampton who had clearly done this 1,000 times. We loaded my room in under 2 hours. My furniture, my boxes, my bookshelf with the camera still clipped to the inside of it. My mother came out of the kitchen twice during this process. The first time she looked confused. The second time she asked what was happening. I said I was moving out. She said, "Where?" I said I had found a place. She stood in the hallway with her coffee mug and looked at the boxes and then at me. "You didn't say anything." "No," I said, "I didn't." She started to say something about Theo, about the money, about the timing. I was signing the clipboard for the movers and I let her talk. When she had finished, I said, I filed a report with the insurance company about the unauthorized change to my policy. They'll be in touch. I said it the way I might mention the weather. Not cold, not angry, just informational. Her face changed. I also spoke to someone about the credit card charge in February, I said. The $412, I have the camera footage from my room if it ever comes to that. She set the coffee mug down on the hallway table. She was very still. I picked up my last bag from beside the door. I'm not doing this out of anger, I said, and I meant it, which might be the strangest part of the whole thing. I had been angry for months, in a low-banked way, but standing in that hallway, I just felt tired and clear, like the morning after a bad storm. I've been the one holding this family together financially for 2 years. I paid rent, I covered the grocery account. I filled the gap over and over, because I thought that's what you did for family, and then I found out you went into my room and used my card without asking me, so I stopped. She said my name. I'm not saying this to hurt you, I said. I'm saying it so you know that I know, that's all. I walked out to the van. The movers had already loaded the last of it. One of the brothers held the passenger door open with a kind of professionally neutral courtesy, and I got in, and we drove away from the house on the wide suburban street where I had grown up, past the Tim Hortons on the corner and the elementary school with the melting snowbanks in the parking lot. And I watched it all get smaller in the side mirror. My phone buzzed almost immediately. My mother. Then my father, calling from work. Then my mother again, 3 times. Then Theo, which meant she had woken him up to tell him, which meant the news had moved faster than I had. I put the phone face down on my knee and watched the highway open up ahead of us. Theo's legal situation, as it turned out, was not resolved by anyone's money. I learned this second-hand months later, through a cousin I'm still in contact with. The dispute had apparently involved a supplier he'd never actually paid, and the amount owed had compounded. And by summer there was a collections issue, and my parents had depleted most of their own savings trying to help him. And the landscaping company, the one that had generated all of this, had never held a single contract. I heard all of this and felt very little. Not satisfaction exactly, not sadness. Something more like the feeling you get when a weather forecast you've been tracking finally matches the actual weather. I had been right about the storm. I had gotten out of the way. My condo is small, but the light is good. I have a savings account with a name I chose myself. I have a ledger that I still keep, out of habit now more than necessity, because it turns out that paying attention to where your money goes is just a good way to live. My mother texted me in October. It was a photo of a cake she had made, the kind she used to make for birthdays when I was small. No message, just the photo. I looked at it for a long time. I didn't respond, not because I was angry, because I had learned in the long way that you learn things that matter, that some silences are not cruelty. Some silences are just the boundary between who you were and who you decided to become. I set the phone down and went back to my book. The radiator clicked on. The window was dark. Outside, the city went on doing what cities do, and I sat in my own light, in my own warmth, in a home that no one could walk into without my permission. That was enough. That was finally more than enough. There's a moment I keep coming back to, my mother sliding that piece of paper across the kitchen table. $12,000 written in her handwriting, neat and certain, like it was already decided, and me looking at it, nodding, saying I'd think about it, while every account she thought she knew about had already been moved, quietly, weeks before she ever asked. I don't tell that part of the story to sound clever. I tell it because I spent a long time believing that being a good person meant absorbing whatever your family needed from you without complaint. That loyalty looked like silence. That love looked like going without, so someone else didn't have to. What I figured out, slowly and not without some pain, is that those things aren't goodness. They're just compliance with a system that was never designed to be fair to you. When I found the charge on my card, $412, a drill still in its box in the garage, I had a choice about what kind of person I was going to be going forward. The easier thing would have been to say nothing, to tell myself I'd misread it, to keep paying rent and buying groceries and filling the gap, like I always had. That version of me would have written the $12,000 check too eventually, because that's what the family expected, and I'd spent 28 years learning that expectations were easier to meet than to challenge. But something in me had shifted by then, not into anger. I want to be clear about that because anger would have made me sloppy, and I couldn't afford to be sloppy. What shifted was my understanding of what I actually owed versus what I had been convinced I owed. Those are two very different ledgers. I kept records. I moved carefully. I spoke to a lawyer before I spoke to anyone in my family, not because I wanted a fight, but because I had finally decided that knowing the truth of my own situation, really knowing it, in documented, provable terms, was something I deserved. That's not coldness. That's clarity, and clarity, I've come to believe, is one of the most genuinely caring things you can cultivate, because without it, you can't actually help anyone, including yourself. The thing about Theo is that no amount of money I gave him would have changed what was happening. The debt kept growing. The plan kept shifting. The story kept getting bigger. Some people are in a pattern that they haven't decided to leave yet, and the most honest thing you can do, for them and for yourself, is stop being the reason they don't have to. I'm not saying I did everything right, I'm saying I stopped doing something wrong. My condo is quiet in the mornings, I make coffee, I check my accounts, the real ones, the ones with my name only. The numbers are mine. The decisions are mine. That feeling of your life being actually yours is harder to come by than anyone tells you when you're young, and it costs something real to get there. But it turns out the price of staying was higher.